Aloha and welcome to the Hawaii Public Health Training Hui's September training, Waiting for Change, a direct service provider's guide to self-care and grief literacy. Before we get started, we just want to go over some housekeeping. Organizers of this training include the Hawaii Public Health Institute, myself, Stephanie Moyer, Community Initiatives and Training Coordinator with Hi-Fi, Makamai Namahoe, the Public Health Programs Associate, as well as the Hawaii Public Health Training Hui's Steering Committee made up of members from various organizations. Some Zoom housekeeping to go over. For all questions, please utilize the chat box or question and answers box located at the bottom of your screen. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on the Hawaii Public Health Training Hui's YouTube channel. We'd like to thank our sponsors and partners for today's webinar, the Hawaii Public Health Training Hui, the Western Region Public Health Training Center, and the Public Health Learning Network. We are offering continuing education credits in 4 areas: CHES, registered dietitians, licensed social workers, and CSAC. To obtain your continuing education credits, you must attend the webinar live. Following today's webinar, you will be sent a link to an evaluation, and evaluations must be completed by Tuesday, September 21st. Upon completion and closure of the evaluation, you will receive a certificate of attendance, and this will be emailed out to you by Friday, October 1st. If you are calling in via phone for today's webinar, please email me at stephanie@hifi.org and include your name and your phone number you used to call in. If you have not received your certificate after 2 weeks, please email me and let me know. I'm very excited to introduce you to our guest speaker for today's webinar, Dr. Mestisa Gass. Mestisa is the Program Director for Mental Health America of Hawaii. Her education and experience has been focused on diverse populations, including inpatient acute adolescent care, community mental health, and military mental health. She is a co-chair for the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention Hawaii chapter, a member of the Mental Health Task Force, the statewide Suicide Prevention Task Force, and an advisory board member for the Waipahu Aloha Clubhouse. Since 2006, she has been working in Hawaii, being originally from the Appalachian Mountains. She is passionate about bringing education, support, and resources to all communities, especially rural areas like those in which she grew up. Without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Mestisa.
Mahalo. Thank you everyone for coming today. I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. These will be available for everyone and they'll be sent out after the presentation. I'll also make sure that I send out a crisis resource sheet that will be shared, and we'll talk about some other resources. So what we're going to be talking about today is quite a lot of information. I do want it to be educational, but also interactive. So at any point, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop that into the chat. There will be time at the end for Q&A, but sometimes, like, if I hold the question, I forget the question. So absolutely feel free to drop that in as we move along. I will be monitoring that as well. We're going to be talking about self-care, mental health literacy, and grief literacy, and putting it in the context of what we've all experienced for the past 20 months. So if you need to take at any moment a break, do some self-care, because there is going to be some intense information. Please feel free to do so. And just know that we're here to support you in any way that we can. We're going to be looking at very briefly the impact that COVID-19 has had on mental health and talking about protective factors and risk factors around anxiety, stress, and grief. We're going to look at and learn some really specific self-care pieces and coping skills that will help you through your healing process and address that anxiety and that grief, and also share some crisis resources. And I'm sure that you all have some wonderful ones to share at the end as well. So just starting the conversation about how COVID-19 has impacted mental health, it's important to note that with all kind of data and research, it's kind of slow to go. So if you're looking for numbers, you're going to have some preliminary surveys and studies, but the vast majority are about 2 to 3 years behind, because that's just the nature of the beast. But what we do know from those preliminary surveys and studies is that COVID-19 nationally has had an increase for people's experiences of anxiety, depression, and sleep-related issues. On average, about 30 minutes of sleep has been interrupted for each person. We also know that if you had a pre-existing mental health challenge, you probably had an increase in symptom presentation and severity of symptoms during the COVID-19 presentation. And this was typically done for 2020. So that's what we were seeing. Prior to the last 20 months, about 3.7% of residents were living with a mental health condition, and the vast majority were not receiving treatment. About 68.2% were not. We're going to be talking about grief in a little bit more detail, but we'll start by saying that about every other day, someone in Hawaii does die by suicide. And what we've seen is each person's passing impacts about 5 people. So take that into account when we start to talk about grief, and the importance of doing self-care is how many people in our community absolutely can be impacted by what we've been experiencing. We're not going to get too deep into this, but just to see, this is kind of the breakdown nationally of people's presentations of anxiety, depression, and the combination of the two. And 41.1% is very high numbers, and that was from January of this month. When we start to think about that and what that looks like across the age ranges, what we see is our early adults, 18 to 24, are reporting the highest numbers. There could be any number of reasons for that, but I think that when we start to look at what happens in that age range, from launching to starting school to graduating from high school, your first jobs, moving out, all those really big life transitions that happen during that specific time frame, they're absolutely being disrupted right now. And so that is important to look at when we start to talk about who's being impacted. Sorry, I thought I was going to sneeze for a second. And we'll quickly just look at this. This is a really great schematic from the World Health Organization. And what it's just really showing you is there's a number of risk factors that are present for people. You can look at it from the setting to the systemic levels and across all the different developmental periods. And just to name a couple, things such as peer pressure, debt, poverty, physical ill health, social inequalities, all of those are risk factors, and that list is quite long. And so it's important to recognize why those conversations are happening for everyone across all those different ages, because some of those challenges are unique and specific. Most of you are absolutely providing care and working during this challenging time. And so we do want to talk about the uniqueness of that. The fact that there are going to be stressors specific to working in the past 20 months. For those of us privileged enough to be able to continue to do so and providing direct service care, we know that sometimes when we're working with someone and they're experiencing all these additional stressors, they might not be progressing. They might have multiple crises or even be a little bit aggressive while we're working with them. We might tend to focus on working with our clients and patients because we know that they need it with everything that's happening, and we might neglect ourselves in that process. Sometimes we're having to move into doing more on call, having longer hours to meet the needs of the community. A lot of people have been changing their positions, and leadership is changing. Staffing is dramatically changing. Funding is those are changes that are also happening. So we know that work is being impacted, and sometimes even though we're doing our best, we're still not getting done what we need to get done. So we might feel underappreciated, overwhelmed, be getting negative feedback. We might have more projects to do, and so feel more of that pressure to get things done and having that difficult time doing it. And the nature of remote working, though it does provide some benefits for some people, can still feel really like professionally isolating, socially isolating when we're used to working within those really nice networks. The other thing I would like to discuss is this is a very unique time. It's one of those times where, as a provider, as someone who's working in a community, you are experiencing the exact same stressors that everyone else is. And so you're trying to provide care while at the same time take care of yourself. So when we work with people, sometimes we're able to say their story is unique. This is not what's happening to me as well. But everyone we see has this small segment that is exactly like our small segment. So your boundaries may become too permeable. You may see your story in their story and have a really hard time leaving it at work, going home, unplugging, and doing that really fantastic self care. So, those are things to keep in mind when you're looking at your work stressors. I have been talking with people, and I'm going to check our chat just really quickly. Awesome. I've been talking to people who've been doing specifically like mental health related care. And what they've said is, I've been sacrificing my schedule. I've been making sure that I've been putting in as much as I can for my community. I know people need things. I know there's a shortage of accessibility, but I'm starting to feel as if I'm not as present, as if I'm not as compassionate as I could be. I'm starting to feel run down and exhausted no matter what else is happening. And when I started to think about that, I'm like, we need to check in. We need to be able to kind of step back and say, how are we being impacted? And where's my quick check in? And this is just one form. There's many out there. This is from 2002, and it's a really quick self care assessment for those providing care. And it's asking you to step back and say, am I still appearing competent and professional, caring and warm? Am I able to provide that confidentiality? Do I do self talk at the end of the day so I can soothe myself, like saying, it was a difficult day, but I'm going to get some good rest and go again tomorrow? Do you have any sense of balance between work and play? Are you accessing your support system? If you don't have the adequate support system, are you growing it so you do? Are you doing those leisure activities, or are those the things that you're sacrificing? When you're working with someone, do you feel renewed, interested in their challenges, interested in your professional life? Are you keeping, again, those really good boundaries? If you need additional support, are you getting it from a professional who is familiar with the work that you do? And in all things humor, I know it's really difficult to find sometimes those light moments in the day, but it's crucial for us to be able to build those in because laughter is very healing. Are you still having those moments where you're enjoying your time and having a little bit of laughter? And of course, maintaining legal and ethical guidelines. I like this assessment because it's broad and you can just kind of skim through it and kind of sit back and say, how many of these things are things that I'm working on, and not have shame about the fact that you might say yes to some of these. And instead to say, when you do say yes, that's some place I can do my work. That's some place I can add in more self-care and maybe hopefully light my load a little bit. We have that metaphor of you can't pour from an empty cup. And that really speaks to what we're going to be talking about, which is self-care. You have to fill yourself up first before you're able to share that with somebody else. I know, easier said than done. With that being said, there's still this element of personal stressors that can happen, which is why we are talking about grief today. There are multiple roles that we play within our family systems. It's a partner, a child, a parent, and sometimes those caregiving roles become caregiving roles that you have to do every single day, just by the nature of people that you care about. And some of us weren't expecting to play multiple roles like teacher, parent, when all of this started. And we've now been doing it for quite a while. And we're still trying to figure out, how do we do self care when I'm expected to be multiple people? And there's no easy answer for that. But one of those things that we always talk about is having grace, being patient with yourself, and recognizing nobody can be multiple people at any singular time. So do your best, but know your best shifts from day to day and moment to moment. There could be financial stressors, physical or mental health stressors, even changes in relationship statuses, major life transitions that just naturally occur, but are occurring during this difficult time. And the list of stressors could be very long and unique to you. Now that we've talked a bit about stress, I do want to talk about what it looks like in your body, because stress and grief do certain things to our bodies. We're pretty familiar with having issues with our psychological symptoms like worry, agitation, irritation, restlessness. But also, there's this element of when we're stressed, and I'm not going to go too deep into it because your nervous system does get activated. And when that activates, what happens is your brain sends information on a different route. So imagine instead of taking the long way home, it takes you on a shortcut. And that shortcut is much quicker. You get to see a lot less. And so there's just not a lot of sightseeing happening. When you take that shortcut home, that's why you start to have attention issues, concentration issues, why you have a hard time making decisions and remembering things. Um, it's part of the process of the shortcut. The shortcut's meant to get you to the place you need to be quicker. And that's why work also gets affected. Of course, sleep issues and avoiding other stressors, even if they seem like minor stressors, in a time of distress, everything feels very large. So you might avoid things that need to be done and just aren't getting done. Highlighting here the importance of understanding stress in the body, how your body relates to that is very important. You might have rapid heartbeat, shortness of breath, chest pains, and muscle tension as part of your anxiety presentation and even part of your grief presentation. If you didn't know I was talking about mental health and I just said rapid heartbeat, shortness of breath, chest pains, and muscle tensions, even dizziness, what kind of medical condition would you assume that I was talking about? Feel free to drop that into the chat. Yep. Anxiety, POTS, heart attack. Yeah, there's a number of panic attacks. Yes, there is a number of medical conditions that absolutely aligns with. So we're looking at heart attacks, asthma attack, allergies. And here's why that's important. We don't want to just naturally assume that someone's experience is mental health. We want to be able to ask, when's the last time you talked to your doctor? Because someone who has an underlying medical condition absolutely can have that exacerbated by their mental health experiences. So have them check in and get that support while they're also working on this other piece. We assume it's medical until we know it's not. That's our rule of thumb. Safety is number one. But these are all common symptoms of anxiety and even grief. Stomach pains, I think, is when we don't talk about enough. Some people are very, and these are people who typically, not everyone, but these are typically people who have had complex trauma, who might be desensitized to some of the psychological input, but a little bit more sensitized to the body input. And so this person's going to say, I don't feel stressed, but I have had an upset stomach for 2 weeks ever since I found out fill in the blank, right? And so we need to know that part of that is that your nervous system interrupts your gastrointestinal function. And that's important to know because if you're one of those people who just don't clue in until you're really stressed, high level stressed, but you can clue into the fact that, I'm having headaches, I'm not sleeping well at night, and my stomach's upset, you could go, that's possibly where my stress is. My stress is in my body. And most of the times when we get really savvy in our emotional intelligence, we note it happens in both places, both in our brains and in our bodies. So just know, even our little ones, they tell us that my stomach hurts, my tummy hurts. And so they're very good at being able to say, this is what's happening in my body. We need to listen and make sure that, of course, we're having them check with the doctor first and then helping them learn the self-care and coping skills that we're about to talk about in just a few minutes. So when we look at all those different things, we really have to talk about the normalizing of some of that experiencing because of what we've experienced in the last 20 months. I personally am one of those people, very stoic, very kind of low level. I can get excitable about some things, but for stress and anxiety, it's very low for me just naturally. I'm lucky with that. But when people say I'm starting to feel anxious, I first have to ask myself, like, is that a normal response to what's happening in the world? If we're telling everyone, yes, anxiety, depression, sleep issues are common, then we have to take that into account and not assume that everyone's in crisis. The typical time frame that we're considering is every day for 2 weeks or longer. If someone's starting to show some of these warning signs consistently for over 2 weeks, I'm going to start to check in. If there's telling you, I just don't enjoy doing anything I used to like to do, and that's been going on for months, there's my red flag. If these people are extroverted and they're not engaging in their social support systems, they're not answering those phone calls, even if they're introverted and I haven't heard from them in 8 months, I'm going to say this is very outside of their normal pattern of behavior. Even established new patterns of behavior from last year this is still different. And those are those times when I start to step back and again ask those questions. How are their relationships doing? Are there activities like eating, exercising, hygiene, getting ready? Are those still happening in a healthy way? If they at all express suicidality, we start to do our assessment and ask, are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking about suicide? Know that when you ask that question, it does not put it into their minds. Instead, what it does is it makes them know that you're a comfortable person to talk to who could ask the question and hear the answer and find the resources that they need. If someone says yes, Hawaii Cares, National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. If it's an immediate concern, 911. We never drive anyone anywhere. We want to make sure everyone's safe. Other warning signs that look a little bit different that are happening at work would be the ones underneath those. So this would be not being able to get those projects done, skipping breaks, not liking work as much, just feeling emotionally exhausted no matter how much you're doing, feeling irritated, chronically bored, staring off into space. And again, some of you are probably thinking, oh, that was yesterday or today. I've been doing that, right? But again, consistently for most of the day for 2 weeks. And then a huge one is ignoring personal needs. If you're in the helping field, if you're working with people in the community, we have a tendency to give a lot of ourselves, but we can't give what we don't have. So we really have to focus on taking care of our personal needs first and not feeling guilty about that, not feeling shamed about the fact that we need things too. It's about the long haul, right? That while I can make that sacrifice now and get that done now, it doesn't necessarily mean in 6 months from now, having done that every day, I'll still have it to give. I'd rather give a little bit to as many people as possible for as long as possible than a lot to only a couple of people and then not even have it for myself. When you start to shift the framework, you can see why it's so important that we talk about that self care. Just going to check. That's an excellent question. So, someone asked, what about those who may overcompensate when struggling and overwork instead? How do we recognize those warning signs as well? I feel like you might have called me out a little bit. I'll be super transparent. There are those of us, and we call it sublimation. I could go into long psychological blah, blah, blahs about it. I'm not going to. What it means is that people who do feel stressed, who do feel overwhelmed, who may be grieving or feeling depression, some of those people actually take that energy and funnel it into something else, into a project, a hobby, into work. It's how they cope, right? And then the negativity, because some of you are going, I wish I had that problem. That sounds amazing. But the negative part of that is that they don't sit still long enough to feel the feelings. They're just trailing them behind them until there will come a day when they're really tired, they're not feeling good, where those feelings catch up, and then there's a lot of them. So for those of you who, like myself, tend to pull those feelings into work and get things done. And like that makes us feel good. And so we just keep funneling it into it. The warning signs that you're looking for is that you don't have that balance between work and play, that your schedule is just drifting, work is drifting into that personal time more and more, that you're having a problem going to sleep at night because it's hard to shut down that brain that's just purring with all those ideas and all those emotions is really what that is, and having a hard time calming down. If that is your natural tendency, that is a great skill. It's one to be careful of and to build in mindfulness, to build in time in nature, and to recognize I purposely have to slow myself down sometimes and check in because I know that if I don't, this is what's going to happen. Tom, excellent question. Um, is stoicism mistaken for indifference? Yes, Tom. It is. Now I say stoicism, but I also like have to say that you you heard it a little bit earlier about the bio that I was raised in the Appalachian Mountains. It is a very emotionally stoic community due to the high levels of violence and the difficulty of surviving and limited resources, which yes, does mirror some of the locations that we have in this beautiful place as well. And the stoicism comes from this knowledge that life is difficult and life is painful, and that you just have to, like, they have a little bit of that, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. And that gets modeled to the next generation, and that gets observed by all the children in the community, and they start to also have that same pattern. I myself was extraordinarily stoic and had to learn to be a little bit more adept at communicating, because sometimes my emotional presentation is very quiet, whereas my internal experience is not. And so being able to be a much clearer communicator and say, this is how I feel, even if you can't see it or it doesn't read the same, this is what it is. And I think that we have to keep that in mind, that there's cultural differences, different presentations within family systems, social historical trauma that impacts people's capacity to feel comfortable really expressing it and feeling an emotion. So I don't think that it's indifference. It can be mistaken for indifference, but I don't think that it is. And we have to honor the fact that people's emotional experiences are on a spectrum. What is trauma to you might not be trauma to me, even if when you hear it, you think, wow, there are a lot of individual differences. Just reading a comment someone noted about they really feel for those people working at hospital clinical settings that really don't feel they even have the option to prioritize themselves or take a step back. They need the need for care is so extreme. The staff may need to self advocate. Having worked with military members who were diagnosed with post traumatic stress disorder, the one thing that really stood out for me was when they would say, I don't like being called a hero. Now, that's not true for everyone, but a couple of the people that I did work with told me, I don't like being called a hero. And I would say, oh, that's interesting. Can you tell me about that? Teach me about why that feels that way to you. And they would say, because it almost makes me feel like my sacrifice, my pain, my journey, my struggle is expected, and that I'm supposed to just be okay. And I hear that same language being used with our healthcare providers, right? And that doesn't mean that it's coming from a negative place at all. And it doesn't mean that people are going, I don't like being called that. But it does kind of put into the framework this idea that there's an expectation of extreme self sacrifice, and that is not healthy. Can we rally to be able to provide more support when needed? Yes. Are most of us doing that? Absolutely. But we do still need to be able to step back and say, at what cost? When we're in a safer place, when we've moved further through this, at what cost? Are we going to be able to provide the support for them? Are they going to be in a place to feel like they can trust people to provide support for them? Or was the sacrifice too great? And those are just ongoing conversations I think that need to be had. And yes, if they're feeling really under supported and very overwhelmed, absolutely advocating. So it's very heavy information to get us started, but I also want you to be able to see what some of those challenges are before we start to talk about protection. I'm just reading the comment in the chat about having grown up in more of a violent area, having worked in a position that probably also was very intense with stress and seeing things that the general populace might not have seen. Um, the one thing I will say, because when I did direct service care, I worked with people who um, were growing up in these very violent neighborhoods and having these very intense experiences, and were absolutely survivors of complex trauma. And I told them, your skill set is unique when you get healthy. For people who have not had that complex trauma, but have had a lot of life experience, that skill set is unique, especially if you're healthy, because you will be able to have a much higher tolerance for handling stressful situations. You won't have your nervous system flip at a 60. Yours might actually flip more at something that someone else would go, oh, that's an 80. And you're going, it's really not, because your spectrum is it's much wider, it's much deeper, because you've had so many experiences. And yes, some people might perceive that as indifference, and it doesn't mean that it is. It just means that you are unfortunately blessed with a skill that you've had to earn in a very difficult way. And that's what I always tell people who are complex trauma survivors. You will have skills that other people don't, and you've had to gain them in ways we wouldn't want you to, but it doesn't mean they can't be skills. Absolutely. There are some really fantastic protective factors, and that list is forever long. But what we do know is if you just start to focus not on risk factors, not on all the things that have been happening, but instead on the things that you can add into your schedule, you will be safer. You will be more functional and healthier. Those are broken down into different kinds of things. And so you can do biophysical. A couple of examples are healthy attachment. Just know if you didn't get that healthy attachment from your primary caregiver as a child, you can still have healthy attachment with a partner, with a child, just as long as you have some type of healthy attachment. It could also be exercise. It's just how is your body functioning? How are you doing? Psychologically, absolutely support system. Who are you going to call? Who are you going to talk to? And we're going to go into a support plan a little bit later on. Emotional regulation, and I think that's what they were speaking to a little bit in the chat, is that some people are really good at emotionally regulating even during times of crises where other people haven't had as much practice, haven't been exposed to as much, and aren't as good at self-regulating in those crises. When I say optimism, I want to be really clear. This is where people have a perspective of hope, and it's not blind hope and faith. It's not like everything is wonderful. I'm Pollyanna and everything's just great and nothing bad ever happens. That is not protective. We always give the example of it would be seeing, someone giving out free puppies in a van, and you'd say, I love puppies. That's not protective. That's not safe. But instead saying in an experience, this is happening and I see the reality of it, but this is going to change at some point and it's going to get better. I don't know when and I don't know how, but life always changes. So this will too. That's the optimism. It's not to the point that it's like not based in reality. Another protective factor, of course, is social. While we keep saying, please stay connected, even if you can't stay physically present, because we need that. We're social animals, and that could be friends, family, also access to services in the community that they need. We've had to look at virtual platforms to have more access to services, but not everybody has access to online, and we forget that sometimes. So important to think about. And of course, spiritual. When I say spiritual, it doesn't necessarily mean, it could for you organized religion. This could just be for you non-organized, or a very loose set of beliefs that have nothing to do with kind of this like what we consider spiritual element, but instead is about moral beliefs. Whatever you use to make meaning of your life, you dig into that when you are stressed. You really move into that when you grieve. And being able to say, I know what mine is, and mine helps me move forward is really important. That list again of protective factors is very long, and these are just a couple of examples. You could be doing very well in biophysical and really struggling in spiritual, trying to figure out what this all means. When you do that assessment for yourself, to sit back and say, are all those big categories being fulfilled? And if they're not, take a little bit of time to see what small thing you can add in to address that would be. I'm just checking chat and questions. Excellent. I always like to ask this question because I think that self-care is very personal. I think that it looks different for everyone. You already know transparently that I pull that anxiety into doing things. So my self-care would not be relaxing to other people. I'm going to go out and garden, I'm going to read this book, I'm going to start doing a handicraft, and other people are saying, I just want to sit down for 30 minutes and deep breathe. I just want to watch a funny show on TV and not think about how my day went. And to them, that is self care, and that's what's working for them. And so I always say, like, no judgment. Whatever works for you, please do it and just make sure that it's still working for you. We're going to take just a moment because I love seeing what people have been doing for the last few months that is working for them. If you're comfortable, feel free to drop into the chat the type of self care that you've been doing that you found really effective to help you with anxiety, stress. And if you happen to be one of those people healing through grief, what you found effective. running, watercoloring. I tried watercoloring. Very awesome. I wasn't good at it. I'm still doing it. I still liked it though. Gratitude journal, meditating, walking. Yes. Calm app. Excellent. Trisella reading. Yes. Laundry. Awesome. You never know what's going to make you feel relaxed. Going for those walks, sewing, listening to that music outside and hiking, working out, Sudoku. That would make me stressed. See, that's a perfect example. I would not be good at that. Awesome, though.
Hey, Mestisa, it's Steph. I just
Yes.
wanted to hop in real quick. For those that are chatting in, thank you so much for your willingness to share. If you are comfortable, if you want to change the setting to everyone versus to host and panelists, please feel free to do so, especially for the questions. Just so others can see what questions you're answering, or excuse me, asking in case they have similar questions too.
I see a lot of comments about people's dogs, and someone got a new one. That's awesome. K dramas. Love K dramas and macrame. Yes. PS5 and puzzles. Singing. Awesome. Face masks on the beach. Oh, Susan, book club. Love it. We have a book club at MHAH. Bath bombs. Oh, planting flowers. The reason I love seeing this is because so many people are working really hard. They're working really hard at their self-care, and we don't typically get to see that. And sometimes when I see these things, I go, ooh, I'm going to do that this weekend. It just reminds me of, yes, Judy, yeah, walking in the rain, stars at night. It just reminds me, yeah, those are things I also enjoy and would like to do. Perfect. The background of blue roses. I did not grow those. That was Canva. Wonderful. I pulled this list together and I made sure that these were specific to grief because we're about to talk about grief and grief literacy. I wanted to be able to kind of sit back and think about what brings us comfort because during this really difficult time, the big comment that people have been saying is, I just don't feel relaxed. I just don't feel soothed. That was the word, soothed. And so when I started doing the research for this, of course, I had this giant list for self care. I could go on and on about it. But I was like, what do we do when we don't feel soothed? What do we do when we are grieving the loss of what we thought our lives would be like right now? This is what people started talking about. A lot of the things that you're already doing, getting that good sleep, going out and getting some sunshine, spending that time in nature, choosing intentionally to unplug from your phones and your tablets, finding skills that you really like to do and then leaning into them because that makes us feel like I'm good at this. This feels good to me. Aromatherapy and cozy blankets. Some of you were talking about relaxing sounds, that music, warm beverages, taking care of something, all you pupper people. Yes, that's what you were doing, taking care of something, making those really nourishing meals, gentle exercise. If you're one of those people who have a lot of energy, you might want to do less gentle and more intense, and that's fine, just as long as it feels good to you. Journaling, doing that visualization, like I'm walking on the beach, I'm walking through the woods, whatever that is that's calming to you. It can even be colors, just imagining your favorite color, talking about how you're feeling, sharing those feelings, not isolating, finding that spiritual support that matches those value systems that you have, going for a walk. And if you're having a hard time engaging in activities, find a buddy. I was wanting to get more out in nature. And so I was like, oh, gonna call my hiking buddy. I call him the muddy buddy because it rains almost every time we go hiking. And I like muddy buddies. It's a tasty treat. Um, but they keep you accountable. And if that person knows that you're having a hard time, then they can say, like, okay, do you want me to rally or do you want me to support? Like, what do you need from me? Of course, learning new coping skills, practicing them, sharing them, meditating, mindfulness, just staying in the moment and worrying less about what's going to happen in 6 months because we don't know. We can predict and project, but again, we don't know. Go back and look at your New Year's resolutions each year for the last 2 years, and you'll see we don't know, but we have this feeling of working together and working forward as a community. Practicing radical acceptance, this is a skill that I would say is one of my top 5. It is easier said than done. If you had attended any trainings I've ever done, you know I'm going to talk about radical acceptance because it is so powerful and deceptively simple. And what it is looking at someone, some relationship, or some event that's happening and going, I can't control any of this. It's out of my control. So I have to accept it. I don't like it. I don't want it. That's possible, but I can't change it. So why put energy there? I can, however, control these things. And so that's what I'm going to control. And that's where I'm going to put my energy. I can't control my past. It is done. I either got what I needed or I didn't. I can't put my energy in constantly thinking about all the ways I didn't get my needs met. What I can do in this very moment is say, this is what I need right now. And maybe that is because I didn't get it back then. But let me put my energy in learning it now and how I'm going to move forward, how each day I'm going to choose to work on that and practice that. You can see how powerful radical acceptance can be in really large experiences. Increasing grief literacy to me is my new passion because I am currently going through my own grief process, having lost 3 family members in 6 months, very close family members, and realizing yet again that we think of grief as being so private. We think of it as being something that we do with our family behind closed doors that happens immediately at the time of loss. And we sometimes don't know what to say to other people and we don't know how to ask for what we need. And we forget that 16 years from a loss, it still hurts. And we need to be there the day of, the 6 months after, 16 years after, and still say, I care about you. Do you need anything? Grief literacy is going to help our community move forward because for every person who passes, 5 people are impacted. When I started this training, I said every other day someone dies by suicide in Hawaii. Now take that and multiply by 5. That's every person who's impacted. And if I tell you that you don't move past grief, you move forward with grief, just keep adding those numbers together. And you'll see why it's so crucial for us to talk about how to love one another as we heal. I'm going to check our chat. Yeah, some people are saying, I chose to take some time off. Some people are saying, I take like an emotional break and I just let it out so that I can move on. I think we also need to start to be okay with normalizing. People have feelings, and those feelings happen in public sometimes. I remember right after the loss of, so being really transparent, the loss of my father, I was expected to go and do this conference. And unfortunately, the person who was supposed to speak got sick. And so I had to be the speaker. I didn't know I was following someone who would be talking about the loss of their father. And I had some emotions about that. And I thought, I'm not doing it. I'm not being stoic. And so I just let it go. And it was strange, uncomfortable, and very freeing because so many people said, that's me. That's where I'm at too. And we don't get to talk about that because everyone does it in silence. Choose how you're going to start to push your boundaries in healthy, appropriate ways so that you can start to share those feelings. So many people are going through similar things. And yes, people have an expectation. Someone mentioned people are there for you in the beginning and then just expect everything to go back to normal. And it doesn't. You're forever changed by grief. And we're going to talk about that. And it's not always in negative ways. For me, it's very transformative. And we are gonna talk about that. Yes, Miami, we're gonna talk about that. There are so many beautiful, thank you. There's so many beautiful celebrations. I think that the further we get away from the natural occurrence of grief as part of life, part of loving somebody, the harder it gets for people to be able to process it. This is a natural part of life. It's just the difficult part. But to me, it's the same coin. It's love on one side and grief on the other because I can't grieve what I don't love. And grief is different. It looks very different and is about different things. Just looking at a couple grief statistics, about 2.5 million people in the US pass every year. Again, think about that average of 5. Children, we always want to think of them as somehow like kept safe from this occurrence, but 1.5 million children lost a parent. When we did a quick survey, we found that 57, over half of the people who responded said, yes, I am actively grieving. And a couple years ago, when people were looking at bereavement, 60% of people were saying, yep, this is private. 45% said, I'm just uncomfortable talking about death in general. The most natural and predictive process besides birth, we're uncomfortable talking about. And 63% avoided talking to someone about their loss. That is a very isolating feeling. When I mention grief, I want to be clear. At the heart of grief is loss. Loss of something, someone, loss of what you thought your life would look like at a certain time period, loss of an experience you've been looking forward to for years. When we look at those young adults, one of those things I think about is what they thought their senior year would look like. They have been working towards that their whole academic career, and to get to a place where suddenly it is immediately transformed, they are grieving what they thought it would be. At the heart of grief is loss. So you could lose something or someone. Grief is compounded if you've already have a pre-existing history of trauma and loss. When you go into a grieving process, sometimes you don't know that it's going to happen to you. So you have what you have whatever self-care and coping skills are available to you in the moment. And if you're grieving, it's very hard to think, let me learn a couple new skills. It's just not there. The other thing to think about is that we all cope differently. We noticed that when we talked about self-care, how different those answers were. Some were similar, but there was a vast array of options. So just know when we talk about grief, people respond in many different ways. And crying is not an automatic. For some people, they don't cry during the loss, but they cry for a different loss. And it's so interesting to me because I've been through multiple grief processes that each one is different. And it's not that I cried because I was really close to you and then didn't cry because I didn't know them as well. It's just what my spirit needs in the moment. And so I try not to judge it and try to make sure I'm checking in with myself and going, it just looks different. And that's okay. We all grieve differently. And we have to honor that process and not assume everyone has to do all these things to be going through grief healthily. It just looks different. Someone mentioned in the chat that there are different causes of grief, that it's not just losing someone, and you're accurate. You could have a loss to someone. You can have lost someone to suicide, homicide. You could be going through a divorce or any kind of transition in a relationship. You could be having struggles with chronic and terminal illness, having just been diagnosed with something and really struggling with the loss of expectation of health. You could have lost a pet, a job. You could have lost your home because something happened. And there's a lot of different things that you could lose. And when you think, just stepping back and go, okay, if grief is loss, how many people in our community are struggling with loss? So, how many people in our community are grieving and doing so quietly and in spaces by themselves? That's so important to talk about why and how we support each other. Just checking our questions. Awesome. Yeah, other people sharing their experiences of healing and moving forward. I started my long process of healing and grieving at a very, very young age. My first loss was at the age of 3, and it was profound for me. And it continued to happen every few years. It's the nature of growing up in a place that is not safe, that is violent. And recently, now that I'm at the age I'm at now, people are just getting older. And so people are passing in a very natural life process. And it changed for me when I was looking at grief and my losses this time around. And I started to realize like, this is nature, this is natural. Like, we will all go through this. We have to stand together, learn to support each other, and learn to talk about it openly because we're all going to be there at some point. Why not be there together? Why not be there informed and grief literate and doing it in a very beautiful, supportive way? One of the other things I was thinking was we always talk about how hard it is. And it's not to say that it's not, it absolutely is. But it's also beautiful because we remember those memories, we remember those relationships, we remember all the things that that gave us in the moment. It also transforms you. So when I said my grief is transformative, this is what I meant. That despite the difficulty and the pain that I experience, that I have a deep appreciation for life. Like my friends are like, I don't know that you would call it YOLO. I don't know that you'd call it FOMO. I'm like, I don't know, Carpe Diem. I just see every single day as so precious that I try to do as much as I can with it, but still taking care of myself, still not speeding up too much that I'm you find in a relationship and a good conversation because nothing is guaranteed. Nothing is guaranteed. And so we want to make sure that everything is present and engaged and appreciated. Because of the kinds of losses that I've been through, I have empathy. I have a lot of deep, deep empathy for people who are going through their own healing process. I am the co-chair for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention's Hawaii chapter. That's part of the losses that I have had. I have a very deep empathy for people who are going through a healing process from that. We learn how to love better and deeper because we go through grief. Whatever your belief system is, your spiritual system, you engage it because you have to make sense of what's happening, where it's what's going to happen to me, what happened to this person when they passed, how does this exist in a life, how does this make sense in a natural cycle. All those things you'll figure out for yourself through your faith and belief system. And I am very eclectic at my own and very open to other people's. I find people's faith systems, when they're healthy and functional, to be beautiful things. I love learning about different systems. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so beautiful. But just to know that's part of what happens is you get this deeper appreciation for how you make sense of the world and how you make sense of what is happening. You also find your purpose because things just don't seem as important anymore when you've had that big loss. You start to clarify for yourself, this is not important. This is what is important. So when people were saying, I do really well in a crisis, some people who do well in a crisis have been through this process and are able to say, yes, this is a crisis and this is important. However, we will survive it because I've done that before. I've been through these things before. And this tiny stressor doesn't have as much weight because I've been through this and this was big. The other thing it does is it teaches you about your support system. And I'll be the first one to say people say really strange things when you go through your grief process that they think are supportive. And it's often the burden of the person grieving to correct them. And that often felt unfair to me. But I had to remind myself most of that's coming from a very loving place, just a very ill-informed place. And when they go through their grieving process, my hope would be that the people around them would not say those same things. And if I do my job correctly, hopefully that won't happen, at least for some people, right? Which is why we gather today. We gather here to learn and to share those things. Connecting with your support system can look very different. I had friends who were there for me during certain losses because they could, it was available. They were able to do that, and they weren't able to do it at other losses. And I was okay with that. I have a support system that's very robust, and I can honor the fact that people have their own grief that they're going through or their own concerns, and they can't always be there for me. But I also know that there's really wonderful peer to peer groups specializing in certain types of loss that can support me in an educated, informed way that feels good and validating that maybe some of my support system just can't yet. I have voluntold a lot of my support system, you're going to learn about suicide prevention and you're going to learn how to support people. And that's what we're doing because that's what I need from you, because I need this to be better for me and for my community. So you can tell people this is your platform, this is what you're passionate about, and hopefully they will also follow suit. Just going to check our chat. I always like to think of grief like the ocean, that it's forever flowing back and forth and it touches our lives consistently. It doesn't ever just go away. And every once in a while, you get a rogue wave. Every once in a while, it just sweeps in. And it could honestly be 10 or 30 years later, it just sweeps in and you feel it. And while I used to think that that was Like, ugh, I do not like when that happens. That is not good for me. I now think of that, or try to think of it, let's be honest, try to think of that as a blessing to remind me of those relationships, that they're still that strong that long after, because it just brings that up for me. Thank you for sharing. With all of what we've talked about, you're here because you're still providing care despite all of that we've talked about. And it's really important to be able to say, I can continue to do that, and to know when you need to take a break and not to feel any way negative about yourself because you need to take a break. You're human. People need breaks. Here's a couple of things to look for in case you're starting to feel burnt out. You don't want to say the B word. You don't want to like admit to anyone that maybe that's your experience, but you're thinking, I think I'm having some of this. Are you feeling emotionally exhausted despite your sleep and the self care that you're doing? Are you starting to like depersonalize from situations or interactions with clients and patients because it's so difficult to maintain healthy boundaries? And when you do that, just know it's protective of you. But what happens is we start to depersonalize. We start to objectify other people and have less and less empathy and compassion, because it's hard to do it if you're also feeling overly connected. And that's why breaks are so important. No matter what you do you always feel like it's not enough? I like to think this is my corner of the world, and I will do what I can for my corner of the world, but I am also in my corner of the world, and it is my job to take care of myself. And I will do as much as I can for the rest of it within healthy expectations, but I am my corner, and so I have to think about that too. Oop, I went backwards. Other things to really kind of be mindful of when you're providing care is this idea of vicarious traumatization. Now, I said before when we talked about those boundaries, it's the idea of I bring home someone else's experience. That happens, especially if you're working in crisis, especially when you're working with people sharing. And when I say story, I mean life experience. We all are crafting our own stories by what we're living. I don't mean that in any way to like downplay people's experiences. When someone shares their story with us, we're honored and appreciate that. But sometimes, if we're not in a healthy place, we take that home. We can't enjoy time with our kids. We're not enjoying our self care. We can't unplug from that experience. And so, if you're starting to wonder if you're having concerns with that, it's when those thoughts intrude into your free time. When you start to avoid other stressors because you already have a full plate. If your body starts to show some of those symptoms that we talked about earlier, if you're having a difficult time with things like noises, quick movements, anything that like sets you on edge, that's telling you again, my nervous system is moving up. It's moving up. If you're starting to have distressing behaviors or to have some of those addictive or compulsive behaviors, check in with yourself and just get the support that you need. You'll hear me talk about stress in a very broad way and coping skills in a very broad way, but let me make it a little bit more specific, because sometimes people go, what's the difference? Right? Self care for me is things that you do that are healthy that just make you feel good. Coping skills are what you do that calms the nervous system. So from 0 to 40, let's imagine your experience of stress is on a 100-point scale, and 0 to 40 is little to none. I don't have a lot of stress. I'm doing pretty good. That's a great place to do self care. 40 to 60, I have a moderate amount of stress, but I'm going to use some of the self care and maybe a couple of things to calm my nervous system to try to move that number back down. Oftentimes, when we used to do these trainings, we didn't talk about the 60 to 100. We're like, that's inpatient. People will teach them that in therapy, right? We just said we're not touching that. But the last 20 months have taught us we are moving into this range more and more frequently and more of us. So we do need to talk about 60 to 100. 60 to 100 is where your nervous system is activated. Your gastrointestinal issues are happening, sleep issues are happening, even things like muscle tension, headaches, all those things are happening because your nervous system is activated. And we need to talk about how we're going to calm that down. Clearly, I have worked extensively in trauma. And when I started looking into what's the common factor, when people come into inpatient care with me and they're very distressed, what's the common factor for them all? And the number one thing I noticed is they don't know what to do. When it hits the proverbial fan, they do not know what to do. They tell me, I'm not going to sit here and talk to you for 4 hours when I can barely breathe. I'm not going to sit here and like journal my feelings when what I want to do is pace the room because my energy is so high and I can't even think. And they're right. They're right. In your 60 to 100, the number one thing that you need to do is to calm your nervous system. And that's it. And when it starts to move itself back down, then you can use those other skills. Right now, you're going, and what are these magical skills? We're going to talk about that. There's a lady, her name is Marsha Linehan. She created a whole form of therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy. Love that therapy. She said, let me look at all the different ways people are distressed and how they're going to handle it. And then she selected the most effective ones. Thank you for doing the work, Marsha. I've met her. She's a firecracker. And I fully appreciate that she did this work for us so that we didn't have to figure this out. The first thing that she figured out is, again, if you have a lot of energy and it's super intense, those gentle exercises aren't as effective. And if you're one of those people, burn it off, burn the energy off, do something very healthy and appropriate. Go for a run, go for a swim, do something to burn that energy off so that you can start to reground and recenter. If you know diaphragmatic breathing, do diaphragmatic breathing. That's just simply placing that hand on your abdomen with your pinky resting right at that belly button, taking a deep breath in, holding it for as long as is comfortable, and taking that deep breath out. That's diaphragmatic breathing, and it will over oxygenate your system, over oxygenate your brain, and start to calm your nervous system. It's one of the best skills that you can learn. The other one that I always love to teach people, definitely one of my top 5, is the dive response. If you are at 80, 90, 100, the easiest thing to do would be go for a swim. The second easiest thing to do, because we can't always do that, is to take a wet, cold rag and place it across this portion of your face. You have a gland in your nose right here. When it gets cold and wet, it activates and it calms down your system. It does that because its job is to keep you from breathing in when you're diving and swimming. It can be short circuited by just getting it cold and wet so that it thinks it's diving and swimming. It'll calm your nervous system down by holding on to the oxygen in your blood so your blood pressure goes down, your heart rate goes down, your body temperature will start to go down, and your brain will go, look how calm we're starting to get. It is a wonderful trap door to calm your system. I mentioned lowering the temperature. You can go for a swim, take a cool shower, use an ice pack with something wrapped around it so it doesn't hurt your skin. Any way to lower your temperature because your body will interpret high temperature as a stressor. That can help you. Paired muscle relaxation is the same as progressive muscle relaxation. And what you're doing is you're tightening and releasing different muscle groups down your body to help release muscle tension. You can find these types of scripts for free on YouTube and other platforms. I highly recommend trying them because they are effective. We use this with our clients and patients diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder because they're that effective. Of all these skills, the one I think that you're going to be able to use most frequently is deep breathing. And if you happen to really get to that high level, 80, 90, 100, I highly recommend dive response. Now, if you love the ocean, look at how many of these you get when you go swimming. Intense exercise, you have to pace your breathing if you're swimming. You're going to activate the dive response. You're going to lower that temperature. And for some of you that are lap swimmers, you'll get that tightening and releasing of muscles. It is the perfect stress tolerance skill. So if you like the ocean, spend a little bit more time there. We mentioned the support plan. I'm just checking here. We mentioned a support plan, and this looks a little bit different for people. I always say have this created before you need it. Know who you're going to talk to. who are just fun to talk to. You're not going to tell them what's happening. You're just going to call them because they make you feel less stressed. They're funny. They're engaging. I just need to distract myself. Know who you're going to call who is non-judgmental, a good listener, and if you need to ask for advice, you can because they're pretty unbiased. That's who you're going to call to talk about what's happening. Know if you're seeing any providers that you have those numbers saved into your phone. And if you're someone who's providing mental health care, just know that they are therapists for therapists, people who are so well versed and well trained that they are absolutely able to provide you with care and understand the unique nuances to providing that type of care during this specific time. Have crisis resources saved on your phone. You can even get them for free from different websites, SAMHSA, NIM. They'll send you packages of magnets. I just kind of stick them up at work and stick them up in different places, like, oh, just in case you need it. And then think about what your fast 5 care items are. What I mean by that is at work, at home, in the different places that you find yourself, make sure that you have self-care somewhere close to you, whether that is something that smells good, a squeeze ball, your favorite music, just available to you, and know what your fast 5 are so that you can make sure they're in all your different places. And then of course, just checking in with yourself and asking, what gives myself meaning? It could change from day to day, and that's okay. If today your life meaning is about this, then dig into that. If tomorrow your life meaning is something else, then spend time in that. It really helps us continue to foster that hope and have that optimism. I would I would hazard to say that some of us are experiencing some Zoom fatigue, maybe right now. I've had a hard time with Zoom fatigue. Yeah, it's been challenging because we spend a lot of time on it. Today, I'll have spent 6 hours on Zoom, and so I have to think about what works for me. And so I did research and said, what helps with this? Use the biggest screen available. The screen in front of me is very large. It just helps me feel less compacted in my experience of Zoom or whatever platform that you're using. As much as possible, declutter your space. This is not my space. This beautiful backdrop is not my space. But it helps me kind of like when I see that mirrored, it also makes me feel good. So I added that in. But my personal space is as decluttered as I can get it. I made sure that I had lighting and different kinds of lightings. I have ring lights ahead, lamps behind, overhead lighting. I have a natural window and I can adjust them at any point to be able to meet my needs, but also to adjust them just to feel different from day to day. My chair is pretty comfortable. I try to take breaks to move when I can because I definitely feel it if I don't do that. Change your view from meeting to meeting if possible, just so that it just feels a little bit different. Schedule in breaks as much as possible. I do have breaks. I had 2 hours and they are right in between those 3 meetings. So I can get that walking going. I can have time away from it before I have to come back in. If you are in a space that's being shared with other people, you can always make privacy signs so that they know that you're in a Zoom. Sometimes I have to do recordings or these presentations, and it's really helpful to be able to say, I'm going to need some quiet, right? I'm going to need, if possible, just a little bit more like consciousness about what's happening in the space around me for this time frame. If you are working from home or you're privileged to have a space that you have at work, I do think it's nice to be able to spend a little bit of time making that comfy, making that a healing space for yourself. When we were opening another clinic and we were talking about what we wanted it to look like. And my number one thing was I don't want it to look like a clinic. And everyone said, that doesn't make any sense, Dr. G. And I said, I want people to come in and immediately feel supported. Like there's something about this space that just makes them feel relaxed. And I'm sure you've all had that feeling. When we go into spas, you're like, this feels really relaxing. And we're not going to build giant water features and we're not going to do all the things the spa does, but there's a reason that it works. I went and looked into, and they're very similar but different aesthetic thought processes here. The one that I had looked at was Hygge, it's Danish, and what they would say was think about comfort and cozy, not extravagance, indulgence in the senses. So if you're at home, think cozy, comfy, soft blankets and pillows. We have a warm drink station at work. I have one at home. Bringing in greenery. If you're not a green thumb, I have a really great green thumb, but sometimes it's not always dark green. It's kind of pale green. So I do have fake and real plants that are intermingled. So it always looks really nice. But I've also been very selective about choosing what plants I have in what spaces. So it's the least amount of effort for me. So indulgence, soft music, books, candlelight, low lights, any of that kind of like ambient lighting, comfortable clothes, relaxing sets. I mean, I have a collection of like candles in my space. And then, of course, simplifying color scheme. Your color scheme can be whatever you want it to be. The less visual clutter, the calmer it feels. So my office space at work is done in, because I'm home right now, is done in like blacks, bone, and kind of it, black and bone. I mean, there's some punches of green in there because I wanted to be visually simplified. At home, that space is a little bit different, but it typically is again the neutrals and the calming. And for you, it's whatever feels good. So choose your color schemes and think about that visual clutter can sometimes exacerbate emotional clutter, and figure out what you can do to help yourself with that. I'm going to dig a little deep on this one. Compassion. One of the things that I've been asked the most about was, in this difficult time of providing care, how do I continue to be compassionate when I don't feel like the person across from me is also being compassionate, is also doing what they need to do? That was an interesting question. So I started to ask myself, like, what is compassion? Compassion is when I see that someone is suffering, when I'm able to see that suffering in that person and say, we all suffer. And I have empathy for you because I know that we all suffer and I suffer too. I'm able to tolerate that fact to some degree, even though I'm uncomfortable. And then I feel, because we share that as being both human, I feel motivated to help you feel better. And when we sit across from someone else and we think to ourselves, you could be doing some type of behavior that would keep other people safer, that could show more compassion for our community, that could show compliance to something that might keep them safer. Whatever your belief systems are, whatever your stances are, there are some people who are struggling with having a differing view than others and still needing to provide them with care, and wondering, how do I maintain compassion for them when this is how I feel? When I thought about the process, because I do have a doctorate in clinical psychology, and I thought about the process of learning how to do that. One of the questions they said is, are there things that you don't want to work with? I will say that that has been probably, 10 years ago that someone asked me that question. And I said, I don't want to work with grief and I don't want to work with trauma. You're right now going, Dr. G, that's exactly the two things that you work with. Isn't that interesting? I started to learn from the process that sometimes the most challenging things are our greatest teachers. It doesn't mean that I agree with some things that happen. It doesn't mean that when I sit across from someone that's very challenging for my own personal beliefs, that I don't have a reaction. I just try to stay in a space of non-judgment and compassion, because if I don't care about them and they don't care about me, how are we ever going to learn? I started to think about the last 20 months and what's made that really hard to do. Some of it is misinformation. The people are unwittingly sharing information that isn't accurate, and people are holding on to that and saying this is fact, and you can't undo what they've already seen. And when other people go, you're right, that's fact, it's very challenging to go, oh, okay, maybe I'm wrong, and we're going to talk about why that is. There are other groups who are sharing disinformation, completely inaccurate information, and in ways that is very insidious, in ways that like crept into their lives and they didn't even notice. And that made it difficult. When we started to think about, what do we do with all these people who are sharing misinformation, sometimes what you got back was like really aggressive responses. blaming and shaming responses, guilting responses. And if any of you have children or work with children, you will know. And I say children because I think they are our best teachers. They truly are our best teachers. You will know that when you guilt, shame, and create those kind of blame systems, people don't feel comfortable to learn. But that was our reaction, right? That's what some of our reactions were. And it's because we were scared. It's because there were consequences to these kinds of things. And we started to try to figure out, like, how do we do that in a better way? How do we provide more salient information and say, hey, this is what I saw. I thought this was informative. Or, hey, I was wondering if you read this article and what you thought about that, to provide a softer introduction of accurate information so that they had it. And then they felt like, well, I don't know about that, but okay, I'll look at it. And they felt like that was an open curiosity that could be shared. That's how we start to work against some of this information, this misinformation. Okay, so there's misinformation and there's disinformation and there's this accuracy that is there, and people are trying to figure out where that sits. Now take that grain of sand and put that on the shelf for the moment and think about this one, cognitive dissonance. I'm not going to go too deep into it because it can get pretty deep. But it's when you have two parts of yourself trying to make a decision or trying to figure out what your belief about something is, and those two things don't match up. That happens, right? If you care about someone, but it's not going well, and you're thinking, I don't know how to hold both of those things, cognitive dissonance would say you're going to choose one, and then you're going to go, that's the thing. That's my choice. So I'm passionate about that, and I'm going to ignore all of this. When we feel that dissonance, we feel uncomfortable. We start to rationalize what we have chosen to do. We might get embarrassed about the choice we made if it especially proves to not have been the best choice. We might even try to hide the choice because it was two not great choices for us. We might have guilt or regret about that choice. We might have social pressures that influence us to make a choice because we really weren't sure and we just made one, even if it wasn't one that we wanted. Can you see how this is starting to give framework for some of the experiences people are having? The causes of cognitive dissonances are forced compliance, new information, and having to make decisions. I'm not going to make any kind of value judgments on forced compliance, but it happens. It happens all the time for good and for bad reasons. But when you look at these causes, again, you go, we're having some of that. And when someone is experiencing cognitive dissonance, they feel anxious, sad, embarrassed, ashamed, stressed, and very regretful, none of which really foster learning and discussing what's happening. So taking both grains of sand together and realizing it is one of many, many different facets of why people are making choices that they're making, misinformation, disinformation, add that in. There's just, it's so complex for why people are doing the things that they do. And so when I'm like, what's the answer then? How do we maintain compassion when all of these things are coming together? And what the researchers said, which I was like, it almost looks like I paid them to say this, but I didn't. So I put it in a quote. Self-care is seen as central to the capacity to maintain care for others. If you want to know how to maintain compassion despite their behavior and beliefs and the difficulty you're having sitting with that, it's self-care. Because when you take care of yourself, you have more to give. And you start to understand that people have a lot of different reasons why possibly they have trust issues, why possibly they feel scared about making a decision. Maybe they've made decisions in their past that have not gone well, and they still are living with the consequences and they feel frozen. And so someone says, hey, this is the one we're making. And they go, okay, I'll make that. That's my peer group, only to find out later that possibly it wasn't the decision that would have been most helpful for them. What we do in that time is we start to refocus on ourselves. We start to say, instead of having resentments, instead of focusing on the things I cannot control in someone else's life, I will focus on the control I have in my own, what I can do to grow and to continue to be a healer, a provider. And when I need to step away, I will step away. because this is what helps maintain that compassion and what's so needed as we move forward. There are some resources I wanted to highlight before we move into questions and answers. Of course, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline and Hawaii Cares. If you are someone who is also a survivor of suicide loss, know that the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention's Hawaii chapters Out of the Darkness event is this weekend, and upcoming in November is their International Survivors of Suicide Loss Day. There are wonderful peer groups from many different groups out in our country and in our community specifically that can help provide that extra support if you need it. Keep clicking backwards. Also know that there are some apps. These are two that I like. They're on my phone. COVID Coach does have, and it's free, does have some mindfulness and meditation exercises that you could use. You can also monitor how you're feeling, and it lets you log in and check that to see how you're functioning. CBTI specific for sleep. I work on my sleep all the time because I'm not great at it. And sometimes I think, it's pretty good. And then I plug it into my CBT app and I go, could be a lot better. And that's why I love it, because it gives you reminders, helpful tips. And somehow when you chart it, it's really explicit on where you can make those good positive changes. If you're someone going through a grief process, know that, of course, there are some people in our community who are working with that. I highly recommend the Hawaii Psychological Association page. That's that link below, because they have compiled pages of resources for grief. And grief is very different. Like we said, there's groups for pet support, there's groups for people who are providing hospice care. So just know that this is and it's a very limited list. So there's a lot of things out there. That HPA website does have a much more comprehensive list that you can call, check out the websites and see what's available. Other resources that we have, we at Mental Health America of Hawaii just updated our Finding Help Resources directory. The reason I love it is it's all these different low to no fee resources for the community. It is free online, or you can call us and say, hey, I'd like to have a printed copy, and we'll coordinate you picking that up. But it's also broken up by island. So if you're looking for support for housing on Lanai, you're going to find how to find that in there. And at any point, if you're trying to find a resource and it's just difficult or the numbers aren't matching, if you're having any challenges, call us. We're an office. This is what we do. We help connect people to other resources that we do have out there. People are doing a lot of wonderful things. How you would find this is you would go to, if you're wanting the online copy, mentalhealthhawaii.org, and click on that help tab, and you'll see Finding Help Resources directory as an option. And feel free to share it. People ask me that frequently. Feel free to share it. We do have some social media. So if you're spending a couple minutes on social media, our Facebook page has different events there, different posts there. That is where you'll find our free community trainings. We typically do ones for youth. We do ones on self-care. As of recently, every few months, we've been doing one on healing and grief. And so we go into a little bit more information on that. Our Instagram, we have a general at MHA Hawaii. And then the at Live Now is one specific for self-care. I always like to highlight our YouTube, because some of our trainings are recorded and they're there. So if you want to learn more about sleep, grief, coping skills, there are trainings that are recorded on there. They're free to share. There's even 4-minute meditations you can practice there. And it's for whenever you have time and you feel like, I'd like to watch something on that, you're going to find it there. This is our just regular information. So feel free to reach out and point that you have any questions or need any things. When you get to our website, if you're looking for some of the information I talked about, click on that Get Connected banner. It will take you to a list of other calendared events, trainings, free downloadables. It's all housed there. With that being said, I know that's a lot of information. I did want to leave some time for questions and answers.
Thank you, Mestisa. I just want to say thank you so much for your willingness to be vulnerable and raw and share some of your personal experiences, and also mahalo to those attendees who also were willing to share with the community that we have online on our webinar today. I do want to say one reminder, we will be sending a link for you to download the slides in our Mahalo email today. So all of the resources that were just shared will be included in those slides. Looking at the chat, I'm not sure that we got to this one, but there was a question about therapists who specialize in helping other therapists or other healthcare workers. Do you have any thoughts on that?
My number one recommendation would be to go to some place like Psychology Today. Typically, they have filters that you can put in what you're looking for. These are seasoned therapists. They are very difficult to find because they are our elders in the help community. You can probably also, I mean, my biggest one would be like go to Psychology Today, put in that you're looking for a therapist for therapists. Also, if you're familiar with therapists in general, you can give one a call and ask, do you know a therapist for therapists? Anyone that you recommend, because you also want to find a good fit. So I would hate for you to spend a lot of time searching one out and then just not having a good fit. So if you are familiar with that kind of mental health community, just reaching out and doing that kind of phone call. But also if you're thinking, I really want to work with someone that specifically can work on these issues, again, Psychology Today will have things that you can click that will help filter those things out. You can also call your insurance company, but they're going to give you a very long list of providers, and it doesn't necessarily at all break it down into those who have that higher level of training.
Thank you. So we're getting lots of thank yous and mahalos to you. I don't think there's any more questions. I do want to acknowledge, I see the question about the continuing education credits, and I will get to answer that here in a sec. But anything that you'd like to leave with the attendees before we wrap up today? Last minute thoughts?
I would just like to thank everyone for coming today. I know sometimes when we are going through our own kind of day-to-day challenges, if I had seen the title of this, I'd go, oh, like that's really heavy. But I really appreciate you taking the time to come to learn about this, to share with us the healing process that you're all going through. It just adds to the experience of us not grieving privately, not grieving by ourselves. We're grieving together, we're grieving out loud, but we're also healing out loud and doing it as a community, which is so needed. So I just want to thank everyone for taking that time to come and join me and teaching me and giving me some really wonderful ideas about what I'm going to be doing this weekend for my own self-care. Like board games, I'm in there. Gardening, I think, yes, sign me up. And for sharing all of your wisdom, because that's how I learn. When you teach me, then I go to my next one and then share that with the next people. So again, thank you for sharing this space with me and for being so amazing with sharing all the different personal pieces that you did.
Beautiful. Well, a big mahalo to you, Mestisa, for joining us again at the Hui. We love having you as one of our trainers. As a reminder, this webinar was being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel if you would like to revisit it or share it with others that may not have been able to attend live. I will be emailing you all a link to complete the evaluation, and the evaluation must be completed by close of business on Tuesday, September 21st, in order to receive your continuing education credits. Certificates will be emailed to you by close of business on Friday, October 1st. And if you have not received it after 2 weeks, please feel free to reach out to me and let me know, and we will look into that. Please stay tuned for details on our upcoming trainings for this fall. And again, mahalo for all of you, to all of you for joining us today, and we hope to see you on a future webinar. Aloha.